Good morning. I am sorry, A, for the delay, B, that my printer, both of them, stopped working. Each one has its own excuse. So I just was not able to print any pages. So we would use the screen. Now I see that we have a problem. Here, okay. So we'd use the screen. And again, I apologize for the inconvenience. We also would like to dedicate the shiur to refuah shleima and good outcome for Michelle. That's the daughter of Anne and Ira Kravitz, Michal Dvorah Bat Chana. So may the learning of Torah would be for Hatzlacha and good health. We are speaking today about an extremely interesting figure, which is Don Yitzchak Abarbanel, or Rabbi Yitzchak Abarbanel, or just the Abarbanel, as usually known. The question of the exact pronunciation of Abarbanel, Avrabanel, Abravanel, well, it seems to rely on, it's like Silberstein, Zilberstein. It depends where you are. And as the Abarbanel himself was traveling between different places in his life, it seems that he himself was calling himself in different ways. So we would use the usual Israeli pronunciation is Abarbanel. In English, it seems that Abravanel is more, no, Abravanel, it's here, right? Abravanel. Okay, anyhow. And it's chasing up to the wind. It's not really that matter, obviously. Now he's very different than the other figures that we have spoken about up till now in this series. Why? Because in a sense, and I hope that no one would be insulted, he is not in the same venue of people like Rashi or Rambam or Ramban or the Rashba and other that we have spoken about. He may be a little more similar. If you remember, we had a shiur about Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. So this is someone that was a Torah scholar, no question, and he wrote the Kuzari, a sefer that is being learned at this very day in Machshava, but he was not an halachicist. He didn't write, or at least we do not know about him, writing or giving psakim in questions of halacha. I guess that he was able, but that is not just something that he was doing. And he also was not your professional rabbi. And when I say professional, I do not necessarily mean even that he was, someone was contracting him as a rabbi and he needed to stand for a vote every few years in the shul. So not necessarily, but there are rabbanim that does not need to go through this process, but they are still professional rabbis in the sense that that's what they are dedicating their days for. That's what they are doing. They are teaching Torah, they are learning Torah, they are asking questions. That's what they are engaged in. So even Rambam, that was obviously was also a doctor and many, many other things, but for our sake was a professional rabbi. The Abarbanel never saw himself as a professional rabbi. He was, we would speak about, he was a banker, he was a trader, he was a businessman, he was a great Jewish leader. He was also a writer of Sifrei Pirushim and philosophy on Tanach and in general, but I don't think that he ever saw him. You would ask him, what is your profession? I don't think that he would have dreamt to say that he's a rabbi. It's just not who he was. So we can say Rabbi, why not? He was obviously, again, a great, he was a Torah scholar. He knew, I don't know how much Gemara he knew. I guess that he knew some. But that's not what he became famous for. In many aspects, the reason why I see learning about him and learning some of his writings is not necessarily because, as I said, he was a great Torah scholar in this. Again, I hope that I do not speak too harshly. But I don't think that he would claim it is in the league of Rashi or Rambam or Ramban or Rashba or Ibn Ezra. But Ibn Ezra maybe would claim about that. But the reason why I think it is important to speak about him is because I believe that his life and the event through his life and what he wrote are extremely reflective of the Jewish faith, specifically in the end of the 15th century with the fateful events of the expulsion from Spain, and more than that, as a recurring, we may say, theme of Jewish in diaspora, of growth and sigsug. Yeah, growth and success, but then crisis and failure, and in the end, defeat, which is basically what happens again and again in Europe and in any other place. And there are many Jews, there may be Jews right now who sit in different countries of diaspora, and they believe that all the troubles the Jews had was only in old Europe, or only in the continent, or only in, I don't know where. But here where we sit is always would be excellent. But Jewish, if there is one thing one can learn from Jewish history, there is only one thing that you should learn from Jewish history, and the Abarbanel would be a great example of that, is that there is no place which is safe for a Jew. I'm not going to claim that Israel is safe. I don't think that Eretz Israel was ever safe for Jews. But if you have to be in danger, I think then at least you should be in your own home. Okay, so that is the introduction, why I thought that learning about the Abarbanel is important. Another thing is that the Abarbanel is a delight. Why? Because he writes his own history. He has a very strong sense of historicity, of understanding the importance of the event he is living through. So he's not someone that just write and now we happen to be 500 years later and we can decipher what he wrote and understand from that the historical events. No, he understands that he lived through a very important era and he wants to leave the memory for generations. His writing style, as we'll see in a minute, we may say is Baroque, meaning it's very flowery. It's very, some would say it's somewhat heavy-handed. It's very long, but it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's full weave allusions to psukim. Almost every sentence is an allusion to a pasuk. I myself, I can only recognize some of them. I don't, obviously I do not, I'm not close even to the comment that he had on Tanach. And it's always, it's play of words, game of words. It's just beautiful. I would only point out some, because if we would point out every and each one of them, we would not be able to conclude even one paragraph. Okay, now, the Abarbanel is also one of the most studied Jewish figures in Jewish history. I know of 3 monographs that deal only with the Abarbanel. I think the most famous of them is that of Ben Zion Netanyahu, Professor Ben Zion Netanyahu, who was the father of the former Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. So that's the book. It was also translated to Hebrew. It was written in English, but it was also translated to Hebrew, and it was published by Shoken. So that is a book from the 50s. As you can imagine, it is not updated, and there is knowledge that came to the fore after the book was written, but nonetheless, it is the golden standard on the Abarbanel. There is another sefer written in Hebrew by Professor Shmueli it's called the Rabbi Yitzchak Abarbanel והגירוש מספרד, if I remember correctly, and you can see that his focus is not so much, or not only on the Abarbanel, but on the times he lived through. And just now, in the last year, there is another sefer, another book on the Abarbanel written by, I think he's from Hebrew U, named Scalia, or Scalia, I think. Edward Cohen, don't catch me on the name, but Scalia, I think that was his name. And he wrote a new book on the Abarbanel, and he published two, one in Hebrew, which is part of the Zalman Shazar series. That's something that, if you can read Hebrew at all, that's something you should be, that you should look into. It's a beautiful series. It's called Gdolei Haruach Vayetira Shel Ha'am HaYehudi. These are, I wouldn't say short, but short monographs, let's say 200, 300 pages in Hebrew, a soft cover. They have Rashi, they have Rambam, they have the Abarbanel, they have Bialik, and it's a beautiful series. It is written by the best authorities in the field, and it is written for laymen. So it's a beautiful series. If you can read Hebrew, at least go to the library and just check it out. Maybe you'd want. I don't get any percentage from Zalman Shazar, but I think it's a beautiful work. He also published, he redone this, so that was done 7 years ago, 10 years ago. He republished it just now, a year ago, in English, and it is called the Abarbanel, an intellectual biography. And in it, I heard that, I didn't read the English. It's $50, $40 in Amazon just to buy the book, and another $20 for the, so, okay. I would wait for it to be in the second-hand market. And, but anyway, I heard an interview with him. So I looked online for an interview just to hear the highlights. And at least what he says is that he had redone the whole thing. It's not like the Hebrew, it is more, a little more scholarly, and it deals more maybe with the ideas of the Abarbanel and not only with the events of his life. Okay, so that's, as you can see, that's a lot of pages to read, which I didn't read before this shiur, and you can understand it can easily be a semestral course, and not one shiur which the introduction already ate 10 minutes of. So that's, we would only be able to scoop what we would be able to take, and at least we should enjoy that. Okay, now, what are the origins of the Abarbanel? So the Abarbanel was born in 1437. 1437 in Lisbon, in Portugal. Portugal, how do you say Portugal? Portugal. So in Portugal. Now his family was originally, as we all, it was originally from Eretz Israel, but originally in the centuries before the 50th century, so the 40th century, excuse me, his family was from Sevilla in Spain. They ran away. If you remember, last year we spoke about Rabbi Yitzchak Abarbanel at the Rivash, and we spoke about the pogroms, the riots of Elkanah of 1391. So his family was one of the families that in the pogroms of 1391 decided that Spain is no longer, Seville is no longer safe for Jews, and they depart north to Portugal, and they sit in Lisbon. Now, they were extremely rich family. The Abarbanel was for centuries, very rich family. They were bankers, financial people. They were the elite of Jewish layman leadership. They were not Rabbanim, but they were the elite of the Jewish leadership of laymen, which in Spain was very, in Ashkenaz, I think we spoke about that. In Ashkenaz, the layman leadership was much weaker and the Rabbanim were more in control. Why? At least that's what they are writing. In Spain, the impression you get from reading the Tshuvot, from reading history, is that the layman element was much stronger than in Ashkenaz. So they were part of the strong layman leadership element, in which, I mean, in the best sense I can. And these were people that took responsibility on their kehilot, on their communities. They were sponsoring their kehilot. So these are in the best sense that we can speak of Jewish layman leadership. And they depart for Portugal, but they continue there the same thing. They are still basically they are financing the king. That's what they do. They lend money to the king, and the king pay with interest, and that's a very good deal to have. And the Ibn Ezra is born, as I said, in 1437, and he is getting excellent education, both Jewish education, but also general education. So he is, you may almost say, a Renaissance man, because we are in the 15th century, and Renaissance did not begin in Spain, it began in Italy, but it is making its way through Europe, and it's already in the Iberian Peninsula. And someone like the Abarbanel, born to an elite family of people that were one of the richest families in the whole of the kingdom, regardless of Jewish or not Jewish. So he would get the best education that can be given during the Renaissance. So he is being educated not only in Jewish material, but also in Greek, in Latin, in works of art, in works of philosophy. And as a matter of fact, in his 20s, he writes his first sefer. It's not a sefer, it's a book. He writes his first book, which deals with the question of the properties of the four elements. So what does make fire different than earth and different from air, and what exactly is the definition, which was seemingly a very important question, at least for people that were very strong into Aristotelian science. Now, the Abarbanel himself would grow out, as almost his whole generation would grow out of the Aristotle sense of science, but at least his first book is about how to exactly define these different elements. Now, the Abarbanel believed, as his family, and it seems as other Jews of the area, believed that his family are descendants of David HaMelech. And for him, it was very important. Many people think that they come from David HaMelech, but he didn't also think like that. He also acted accordingly, meaning he saw himself as really born for leadership. It's very important to understand the man. That is a type of aristocracy that almost does not exist anymore. That people feel that they were born to a certain family, so maybe they are entitled to certain things, but no less, they are also obligated. They have commitments because of where they came from. So again, that's a very old school sense of aristocracy. Here in Israel, I don't think that we have it at all. Maybe in some very old country, maybe in England. There are still this type of sense that people feel that because they were born to a certain family, then they are committed to the community. Maybe. It used to have. It used to be that your family name commits you, obligates you to certain type of leadership. Again, I mean, we can maybe be glad that we don't have it anymore, because now we believe in meritocracy, right? It's not a question of who you were born to, but what are your qualities. Fine. But there were also some advantages, I guess, to this feeling that someone is born to be a leader and is educated to begin with to be a leader, and is supported by his family and in the end also by the community. His second sefer, his second book, is called Ateret Zekenim. It's also about philosophy, but this time not general philosophy like we have described earlier of the four elements, but that's an attempt to defend Jewish traditional belief. That's why it's called Ateret Zekenim. Ateret is the crown, and Zekenim obviously are of the old. So you say, I'm going to defend the glory of the old. Why? Excuse me? He is writing in beautiful Hebrew. Beautiful Hebrew. All the sources are original from his book. So I would read it in a second. Beautiful, beautiful Hebrew. Yeah, I'm sure that he was also able, as I said, he was able to write in Spanish, obviously, and he knew at least to read Latin. I don't know if he ever wrote in Latin, but he was able to read because he's speaking about Latin books. But he's writing in Hebrew. He's writing in Hebrew, so he wants to defend the old beliefs against the attacks of philosophy, and also obviously of Christians, because the questions of, I would say, the inter-religious polemics. Now that's a washed word for attacks, brutal attacks by Christians on Jews when they are not allowed really. Obviously, they are not allowed to attack back, but very rare is that they're even able to defend themselves properly. So that's a very hot and debated issue in his time. So he's writing this sefer called Ateret Zekenim. Now again, that's in his mid-20s. And that's what he writes in the introduction. Source bet. Ve'en ani Yitzchak ben le'adoni avi ish chai rav pe'alim hanasi Don Yehuda Abarbanel Sfaradi tahor. So he's in Portugal, but Sfaradi tahor. So and he says that I am Yitzchak, his father is still alive, Hanasi, he is the president. And he means that, right? So he's the president of not of the community here, he's the president for the Abarbanel, you may almost say the president of the whole of the Jewish nation. Okay, that may be an exaggeration. But an extremely important person, Don Yehuda Abarbanel, Kano kineti lichvod atzilei bnei Israel. I was jealous to the honor of the noblemen of the Israel. וחלקה לא אוכל את הלחץ אשר רבים מהחכמים הראשונים וחדשים מקרוב באו לוחצים אותם. But I see that they are being oppressed, and he's using here words from Shiabud Mitzrayim. They are being oppressed by the Chachamim. He means here obviously the philosophers, right? Because philosophy is the lovers of wisdom. So the Chachamim, those that are new and those of old, Harishonim v'chadashim מקרוב באו, they oppress the Jewish religion. ואומר, עת לעשות מן הבא בידי מנחה מהצורי למכתם אנושה. I would like to make some, צורי is like a medical solution. So I would like to heal some of their great injuries, meaning the injuries of the old Jewish belief. Now, it's very interesting. The Abarbanel had some type of fixation, it's not a nice word, right? How would you say that his life, and he was just circling around Rambam and the Rambam's works. And he had a very complicated relationship with Rambam. He obviously he adored him. He revered him. The Rambam was the prototype of the educated Jew who can both be of excellence in halacha and in Torah and in everything Jewish, but also hold to all the educational standards of his day in the general society. So he revered Rambam. But on the other hand, as many others felt, he felt that Rambam gave too much to philosophy. And that Rambam's interpretation of how do you see the Jewish belief in light of philosophy philosophized Jewishness more than it was able to Jewishized philosophy, if that makes sense. And that was he was not the only one that was troubled by that, but others just burned the books. Because he so much revered Rambam, he wrote Peirush on the Moreh Nevuchim, a classical Peirush on Moreh Nevuchim. He wrote a whole sefer called Emunah Rama in order to argue with Rambam's 13 principles of faith. And what he argues, a part of debating each one of these principles, he says, who told you that there are principles of faith? That's a very philosophical idea. He says, we have 613 principles of faith. That's the Jewish idea of belief. So you see, so it's very interesting, this interplay. And he continues, לא בחיל ולא בכוח הקבלה, כי אם ברוחי והעולה בידי מהבנת פשט הכתובים באשר הם שם. Extremely important sentence. Again, he writes that in his mid-20s, but that is a precursor to the rest of his life. Because he says, I am not coming with the force of Kabbalah. It doesn't mean he already, Kabbalah begins to be known. It doesn't mean Kabbalah in the Zohar sense. It means it's not tradition. It's not that I received from my father what are the traditional Jewish belief and now I'm going to defend it. No. He says, from where do I learn what is traditional Jewish belief? From the Tanach. Again, not Gemara. You would use Gemara. You would use Midrashim. But he says the principles of Jewish belief are to be found in the Tanach. That may seem to you as a simple thing to say, but if you try to think about others, other Rabbanim, other Rishonim that were dealing with what is the bedrock of Jewish faith, from where do you extract this bedrock? Do you extract it from the Tanach? That's a difficult question to answer. I would dare to say that most of them, when they were writing about this type of questions, were much more engaged with the Gemara or with Midrashim than with the Tanach, especially not with the plain meaning of Tanach. So that's a new move. It's a very interesting that he sees that as a move that comes to defend traditional Jewish beliefs. So you are making a bold, new, courageous move, but you are doing it in order to protect something which is old and sacred. ויקרא שם המאמר הקטן הזה עטרת זקנים, כי הוא יפרש עטרת תפארת השגתם ויצילם משגיאה. So I called it the crown of the old, because that would defend the belief of all times. And then he says, ואירא כי ערום אנוכי. So again, I cannot pause on every time that he is using a pasuk, but that's a famous one, right? Va'era ki erom anochi. That's what Adam Arishon says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When God asks him, why do you hide after you ate from the tree of knowledge? So just think about the games that he plays here. The games that he plays, it's fascinating. It's fascinating, but we don't have the time. Va'era ki erom anochi, mibli levush hachokma. So he says, I am naked, I am not clothed in the clothes of wisdom. ואין בפי תוכחת, והן עוד היום נגרשתי מפני העיון, והייתי נע ונד בארץ. Now he's using the pasuk from Cain. Right, so I was expelled. That's before the great expulsion. But I was expelled from the yeshiva, he says. And now I am walking back and forth. I'm wandering in the land. פעם בחוץ, פעם ברחובות, עובר לסוחר. פעם בחוץ, פעם ברחובות, by the way, is a pasuk for Mishli. So again, we for us, most of us, for me, I'm speaking my own name, I don't know enough of the psukim from this type of sefarim in order to always identify when you use them. But he says, so I'm walking, sometimes I'm inside, sometimes I'm outside, over לסוחר. That's from Avraham Avinu in Marat HaMachpelah, right? 400 shekel kesef, over לסוחר. But he says, I'm always, but here he used it in the sense of, I'm always walking for trade. So I don't have the time to sit and learn as I would have liked to. ומאז חדלתי לקטר מלאכת השמיים לדעת חוכמה ומוסר. I've stopped my extensive learning. So he had the time of intensive learning, right, in the yeshiva. And he says, but now I am out of that because it's not my fate. My fate is not to be a rabbi. My fate is to be a Jewish leader. In order to do so, that is going to sound anti-Semitic, I'm sorry. But in order to be a Jewish leader, what you should have? A lot of money. It's not fair. It's not, because we have to understand. The reason why it's so is because the Jews did not have a state. They were not able to collect taxes. So who is a leader? The leader is the one that can sponsor the Jewish project. So it's, we need... There is a reason why did it happen. It's not cynical reason. It was needed. It was needed that the people that are able to fund. I mean, again, for me, I only understood it when I went out to the Shlichut in Canada, in Toronto, and I saw the great impact that people of means have in such a community. But all of them were really excellent people. Excellent people. And chas v'chayilad, I would say anything against any one of them, because they were really people that were willing to stand and to shoulder burden of sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to finance Jewish education and schools. It was very impressive. It was very impressive. But on the other hand, they were the ones many times to call the shots. Because if you are the one that closed the budget of the school every year, then who will decide who's going to be the principal? Not the guy that comes and asks for a sponsorship, right? It's the guy that is giving the sponsorship, not the guy that is getting the sponsorship, that will have to decide who's going to be the menayel. That's just the way life is, because he is invested in it. And by the way, he has a business skill, and maybe you'd also have a very good decision. So I don't have to explain it to you. So that is the sefer called Ateret Zekinim. So he's writing this book, and life are more or less fine. He's in Portugal. His father was, at a certain point, his father passed away, and he walked into his shoes, and he was an excellent trader and an excellent financier. That's the word. He was financing, I don't know. Yeah, financing. So he was financing the king. The king was owing him hundreds of thousands of whatever coin they were using there, and life seems perfect until they stopped. What did happen? So we would read his own description in his introduction to his commentary on Sefer Yehoshua. Now, this is, as I said, it's beautiful Hebrew, it's beautiful to read, it's very long. So I do hope that you'll be able to complete all that I have prepared for this shiur, but I have to say that I doubt it. He says, Shalev hayiti beveiti, bait vahon, nachalat avot, bait maleh birkat Hashem. So he says, I had everything that you can ask for. I had money, I had connections, I had the full bracha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, belisbona meulala, right, in the glorious Lisbon, ir va'em bemalchut Portugal. Sham tziva Hashem et habracha. There God gave, as I said, people sit in these type of places and they think, you sit in Spain or in Portugal, Jews were there for 500 years, and they feel that they, and many times they do, own the place. And it's always so surprising for them when suddenly everything flips. And that's what happened to the Abarbanel. He says, הברכה והשמי העושר והכבוד לפניי ותענוגות בני אדם. So I had money, I had respect, I had תענוגות, I had pleasures. בניתי לי בתים, I was the owner of real estates. בעליות מרווחות. ביתי, בית ועד לחכמים. In my house, the sages came to speak Torah. כי שם ישבו כיסאות למשפט. It seems that the court, the rabbinical court, was hosted by the Abarbanel. I skipped because he describes, again, a very flowery language. His success there, בביתי ובחומותיי הון עתק וצדקה, so he does not forget to say that he also gave for charity, ושם, יד ושם, תורה וגדולה, so he had Torah, he had greatness, כגיבורים אשר מעולם, no less than any other Jewish hero. ורענן בהיכל המלך, Don Alfonso. All of that was when the king was the great King Don Alfonso. מלך גיבור, מושל ממשל רב, וירד מים עד ים, וכל אשר יעשה יצליח. So that was a great king, he was a great ruler from sea to sea. I guess all of Portugal, I don't know how from sea to sea. All of Portugal is not from sea to sea. I'm not sure about what these words mean, but he says he was a great king, everything he did was successful. מלך יושב על כיסא דין, now he's using here terms that in Chazal are being used to הקדוש ברוך הוא, he speaks about this Goyish king, right? But he says, מלך יושב על כיסא דין, עושה חסד ומשפט וצדקה בארץ, מלך בוטח בהשם, he was a God-fearing king, ירא ושר מרע, דורש טוב לעמו, that's Mordechai, right? דורש טוב לעמו, he was seeking good to his people, מלך בהתאסף ראשי עם, so when all the heads of the people are gathering, חכם ומי כמוהו מורה, he was wise, no one was able to give justice as him, וכחוזקתו באושרו פקד השם את עמו לתת להם לחם, רווח והצלה עמד ליהודים. So the goyim were in a great state, the Jews were in great shape. בצילו חימדתי וישבתי, I was happy to sit in his shade, והייתי קרוב אליו והוא נשען על ידי. So I was close to him and he relied on me, very important, because he was the one to finance this whole merry times. ויהי היום יום צרה ותוכחה ונאצה לכל עמו ולישראל נחלתו בני יעקב בחיריו. So then came the horrible day. היום ההוא היה חושך. What is happened in this black day? The king became sick. נפל, we can joke, but when your life depends on a certain king who is good name, because there are no laws to defend you, there is only the king and his goodwill. This is very difficult life to live. You are dependent on the goodwill and the temperament of one man. And as long as he's good, you are good. But when he became sick, and כאשר שכב שם נפל שדוד, so he lay down sick, died quickly, ונותרה בציון כסוכה בכרם. So the Jews remained as a sukkah in the yard, in the field with no defense. Right? Like the sukkah that every wind can uproot. באין משען ומשעינה, שר צילה מעליהם, וימררו את חייהם בצום ובכי ומספד, אבל גדול היהודים. So they knew that bad times are coming. I guess that they knew the tachshit that the king's sons was, so they understood what is going to happen. They began to cry and to have אבל, mourning. ויהי רבבת יהודה את הענייה והענייה, ואני נהייתי ונחלתי. He says, I became sick when the king died. חבלים נפלו לי, I suffered, באבלות צרה כמחבירה, it's a beautiful Hebrew. I hope that you at least, even if you do not understand all the words, at least you get the sense that he had a poetic soul. בצום ובכי ומספד עבד גדול יהודי, excuse me, עלי תשתפך נפשי ואתמשל כעפר, I was like dust. וימלוך בנו תחתיו Don Juan. I think they say Juan or Juan in Spanish. So Don Juan. And he says, Melech Hadash Asher Lo Yada. That's, of course, an allusion to Paro, Asher Lo Yada et Yosef. But here, it's Asher Lo Yada et Yitzchak. Right? Et Rabbi Yitzchak Abarbanel. הפך ליבו לשנוא שריו ולהתנכל לעבדיו. You know, I will not continue to read because it's beautiful, it's too long. I would explain to you in a few minutes what did happen there. So, the Abarbanel was close not only to the king, but also to a certain dukas. If you want the name, I can butcher his name for you. So his name was a certain, I wrote it to myself, Barganatza. Barganatza. So it's the Duke from Barganatza. Anyhow, the Abarbanel was also financing him because he was financing everyone. The king, the new young king, and this Duke, the Duke thought that he can overthrow the king. The new young king was very strict and was trying to centralize the government. So take power from the nobleman and take it to himself. So centralize the government. And this Duke figured out that he can cooperate. You remember that back then there was no Spain. Excuse me. These were different kingdoms. And these were different kingdoms. And this Duke decided that he can cooperate with one of the kings of the other kingdoms in order to overthrow this John Juan. But the letter that he secretly sent this other king of Aragon fell to the hands of Don Juan. And Don Juan arrested this Duke. And that was kept in secret. And then appointed a meeting with the Abarbanel. The Abarbanel didn't know that the Duke was captured. Now, we do not know if the Abarbanel knew about the conspiracy or didn't know. he screams that he is innocent. New historians doubt it, that he really could. The thought is that this duke would not be able to really arrange a whole rebellion without the financial support of the Abarbanel. Oh, I don't know. I really don't know. Anyhow, so the Abarbanel is coming to the appointment. In the way, someone that he knows from the court tips him that the duke was arrested, and that if he is going to the appointment, there is a good chance he is not coming back. At the same night, he is not even going to take his wife and children. He is running away back to for his family. It's back. He was born in Portugal. He is running to Spain. His family will join him later. He loses all of his possessions, all of his properties. Obviously, the king sees that as a complete proof that he was part of the conspiracy. And he nationalized all of the Abarbanel's family property, which was humongous. As you can imagine, it was also very good for the king, because the king treasury owed a lot of money to this Jew. So if he's now running away and we are able to take all of his money, not only that we earned a lot of money, we also had immediately deleted the debt that we had to him. So it's very difficult to know what really went on there. Was Don Juan really believing that Abarbanel was part of the rebellion? Was the Abarbanel part of the rebellion? Was it not? Was it just for financial gains? I am sure not in any position to give any answers, but it's very interesting. It's very interesting. So the Abarbanel ends up in Spain with only his shirt to his back, but he comes from the family of the Abarbanel. He's very well known in Spain, and also has this great education, and also he was very, very smart. So he comes there. For the first 4 months, he sits and he asks himself, why did all this thing happen to me? And the answer he gives to himself, and that's why it's in the introduction to Sefer Yoshua, the answer he gives to himself is because I left the yeshiva and I have to learn more Torah. I gave myself too much to the material world. I need to go back to learning. And he sits down. In 4 months, he completes his Perush to Yoshua, to Shoftim, and to Shmuel. Now, if you have any familiarity with the Perush of Abarbanel, he is writing very long, very, very long. There are more than 400,000 words in these 3 books. Now, if any one of you is writing to his, and he knows what does it mean to write even 3,000 words article, that's a huge amount of words in 4 months. So try to make the calculation, and he's not working on Shabbat. So try to make the calculation how many words he needs to write a day in order to achieve that. So that's amazing. That's amazing. And he sits there. And so why does he write a commentary to Yoshua and Shoftim and Shmuel? So one reason, as I said, is because he feels that maybe he's being punished. But there is another reason. Not only in order to atone for leaving Torah, but also, and that would be something that would happen again and again in his life. When the Abarbanel finds that he had lost his reliance in life, right? He has nothing to rely on. He turns to Torah, and especially to Tanach, to learn from there how he should relate to the world and to the situation he finds himself in. And for him, learning Tanakh, he brings all the knowledge he has from, and he is serving as the king treasurer. So he's very much familiar with politics. So when he learns Yoshua, it's not like Rashi learning Yoshua. Rashi brings his own understandings, his own word. The word of the yeshiva, the word of Torah, the word of tradition, the word of midrashim. When the Abarbanel comes to Sefer Yoshua, he asks himself, what does it mean to be a Jewish leader who is trying to conquer the land? And that's a very different angle. That's one of the reasons why the books of the Abarbanel are so refreshing. It's a completely different outlook. So he's bringing his experiences into the Tanach, but he's also using, if I may say so, using the Tanach in order to better understand his own experiences. And this circle is, for me, what makes Abarbanel really a fascinating person, especially for us in living in I don't know if we should use this count, right? But 20 or 21st century, 21st century, and living in Tanakh times, coming back to the Tanakh, coming back to Eretz, coming back to conquer the land, living again a Jewish politics, which is not only the politics of a community, but of a real state. The questions of refugees from Ukraine. For 2,000 of years, we were the refugees. There was the most pressing question was Jewish refugees from other places, and to what percentage, how much do you have to give, how much charity do you have to give? But here it's not a question of charity, it's a question of politics with other nations, selling weapons, Jews selling weapons, right? So these are new questions. You can go to Yoshua, you can go to Shmuel, you can go to Melachim, and these questions are alive. And suddenly you come to this Sfarim with now we know how, not only we know, Rashi also knew. We not only know, we live the experience of Jewish polity. So we come to these books different. And we also can be rewarded from these books in a very different scale than how all earlier generations were able to gain from them. The insights we can gain from a sefer like Melachim are lelo aroch, right? They cannot be valued in the sense that they are above value. I don't know if what the words are. And that is what the Abarbanel for me, that's what he represents. So he's going to Yoshua, he's explaining this Sefarim. So in 4 months, as I said, 400,000 words. And then the king of Seville understands that this new guy came in and he's connected and he knows how to run treasury and he is well educated. So he appoints the Abarbanel as the treasury minister of Spain. And here the circle begins again, because the Abarbanel very quickly becomes very rich, is very much liked by the king. So we are in 1483, okay, 1483. The Abarbanel is able to bring his family to Spain, and if you would remember the years, for 9 years, everything seems just excellent, until it's not. Because in 1492, the king of Spain, with the Abarbanel, claims that it was especially in the influence of his wife, Isabel, who he really doesn't like. And he is giving a command that all Jews in Spain should either convert or leave. There is one exception. He is letting the Abarbanel to stay as a Jew. Why? Because the service of the Abarbanel was too valuable. And here the Abarbanel stands up and he says, I would go with my people. I would leave everything behind and I would go with my people, because I would not stay here as the only Jew when you are expelling, and I would be part of a government that expels all the other Jews. So just think about the courage you need to stand up to the king. And this is a place in which people are being burned at the stake, and tell him that. So that's what the Abarbanel does. He's trying to bribe the king to let the Jews remain. But there is a certain bishop there that speaks with the king and says to him, you know, the Jews sold the Savior, I don't remember, for 30 shekels. And you are now selling him again for 30,000. So he was able to talk the king out of agreeing to the offer by the Abarbanel. And again, the Abarbanel says it was because of his wife, and she was the one that was poisoning him against the Jews. Be it as it may, in 1492, the Abarbanel, together with tens of thousands, maybe more, of Jews, is leaving Spain on a boat, and he would reach Napoli. That's the next station in his journey. And again, with nothing to his back, because he had to leave everything behind. So that is already the second time that it happens to him. And he's devastated. He writes, I am no longer a young man. What I was able to do, again, he was born in 1430, we said 1437. So in 32, he is, help me, almost 60. Right now, you think that 60 is young, and you're right. But back in these days, 60 was very old, very old. He says, my eyesight is beginning to fail, and it was very difficult for him to uproot again. And he has to begin everything anew in Napoli. But he says, we were accepted very nicely, both by the Jewish community and by the king. Again, he sits down to write. He says, okay, why was I expelled? Because I again neglected my commitment to the Perush Torah. Now, he knows that it's not that the whole Jewish nation was expelled from Spain because he neglected his Perush to Melachim. But as I said earlier, I think that most of it is an attempt to reconcile what he sees with what he learned and trying to look again at the Torah and look again on reality. And just one short example. I have completely abandoned the attempt to read, but I would send you, Mirza Hashem, the sources, and if you have time, go through them. It's beautiful. So in the last source, in the source sheet, I quoted from the words of the Abarbanel on Dvarim Yud Zayin. That is his perush on the appointing of a king. And the Abarbanel says there, the Torah speaks about appointing a king, just like it speaks about Eshet Yefat Toar, that is taking a woman captive during a war. Chazal say about Eshet Yefat Toar, about taking a woman during a war, that the Torah is completely against, but because the Torah knows that there are certain elements in human nature that it is better to tame than to oppose, that's why it allowed, under certain circumstances, the taking of women during war. Says the Abarbanel, appointing a king is the same thing. A king is a very bad thing. Now, he's writing like he's the federalist from, he's from the States or from France 300 years later. He writes, a king is bad because that you give all the power to one man that is corruptible, and it would be corrupted. And no one can criticize him. He has all the abilities, and he would use them for his own sake with the highest price for the weakest parts of society. So that's what he writes. He says, so I'm sure that the Torah never meant for us that we would appoint a king as something that should be aspired to. Appointing a king is when there is no other way to rule society. If society becomes so unruly that you have no other way to keep people in place but just by appointing a king, then appoint a king. But if not, shoftim is the better way. And he says, and I saw that in Venice, because in Venice was a republic. It was not a kingdom. So he says, you see, in Venice, they change the government every 2 years, and the new people that are coming in, that are being voted in, are criticizing and checking what their predecessors did. So even when they are in power, they cannot abuse it because they know that they would be judged 2 years later. So that's a there is no other way. It's a Republican or democratic view of the politea. So very fascinating. And again, that's a way Abarbanel, and we don't have the time how we reach the psukim to this light, and he has a whole, he explains Shoftim and Shmuel and Melachim. He has a whole theory. It's very interesting. You see how he uses experience in life to relearn Torah. And again, he's now using Torah also to look at Jewish life and to ask himself, what should we do now? What should we do now? Now, he would again prosper. That's the word that they looked earlier for. Prosperity. So, siksug, prosperity. So, he would prosper again in Napoli. But then the French should come and conquer Napoli. That's much beyond my understanding in history, but that's what happened. So a certain Louis came and conquered, one of them, came and conquered Napoli, and the king of Napoli ran away. And Abarbanel was so close to him that he ran together with him, because I guess he figured out if he would stay, he would be seen as an opponent to the conquering forces. So he's running away, and again he loses everything. It's all. The proof is his life was very difficult. He had very good times, but every time the whole thing collapsed. And you see in his writings that he began to internalize that is the fate of Jews in diaspora. And he writes a trilogy, 3 books about redemption. Now, he believes that redemption would come in the year 1506 because he had some calculation in Sefer Daniel. He lived to see that it didn't happen, which is unfortunate, but that's what happened. But here we come, and I would finish with that, to something that when Ben-Zion Netanyahu wrote the book in the 50s, he dwelt on it very much. He was, I think there is no other way to say, he criticized Abarbanel. He wrote this biography, I guess that he loved the man, but he criticized him. Why? Because he said, you were a Jewish leader, and you had phenomenal skills. If after the expulsion, you were the one in position, if you would say to them, we should now all go to Eretz Israel and create a Jewish republic, and you were a politician, you knew how to do that, then you could have achieved something that was achieved only 500 years later. But the Abarbanel took a completely different approach. His conclusion from his life experience and from what he read in Tanach was that redemption can only come from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because man is not to be trusted. Because human kingship would always, as I said, be corruptible and would be corrupted. So you can only be redeemed by God. And the turn that he took had, in the eyes at least of Ben-Zion Netanyahu, had prevented the natural growth. Obviously we are anachronistic here, and Ben-Zion himself, Netanyahu, was criticized later by later scholars, for sure. But it's so fascinating, this insight. He says, there could have been a natural growth of Zionism, just as in Eastern Europe, when pogroms made the life of Jews unbearable. Then returning to the land of Israel was a natural growth. It could have also happened in Spain, and there were maybe beginnings. But someone in the stature of Abarbanel that blocked it, not only didn't cooperate, but blocked it, that had suspended the development of self-redemption in 500 years, which is a very interesting, I think, thought to conclude with. We didn't even scratch the top of the iceberg of the Abarbanel. So I hope that at least I gave you some taste. I would finish by a recommendation. That is the Perush of the Abarbanel to the Haggadah Shel Pesach. It was written after the explosion from Spain. But in his mind, he sees the explosion from Spain and the Yetziat Mitzrayim. It's a beautiful sefer. Again, I have no presensions from the sellings, but it's a beautiful sefer. The way that he writes it, as in all of the other Perushim, he has in the beginning about 30 questions, and then he begins to answer them. Here, I think it's 50 questions. And then, so you have the kushiyot. You can use only the kushiyot if you want in Nela Seder. Just sit on Nela Seder and shoot questions to the other participants. So that is over la'asiyatam, right? That's a recommendation that you can use in the next Seder. And again, we conclude our words on the Abarbanel by that. What I would like to do now, Be'ezrat Hashem, next week, as Pesach is coming, and we want to finish in the Shulchan Aruch, we would begin to speak Be'ezrat Hashem on the Bet Yosef, and the week or 2 weeks later on the Rema, and with that we would conclude our series on the Rishonim. Thank you very much. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, Rav.
Thank you so much.
For sure. Refuah Shlema.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
It was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.